I have been a professions junkie since vanilla. I have seen the ups and downs of professions and, of course, of the game itself. And in the last few expansions, I've seen Blizzard attempt to implement grindy, complex player power systems like conduits and artifact weapons and Azerite armor, and, well, those were systems that players were forced to engage in because they were player power systems, and that sucked. And at the same time, professions often felt like they were too simple and poorly thought out for their own good. I mean, they had some good and exciting sounding ideas, like letting professions craft different types of weapons in Battle for Azeroth, or having one flavorful ore per zone in Shadowlands. But all too often, these ideas fell flat on their faces compared to professions' heyday in the Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, and Cataclysm. So, being a professions junkie and looking at these two things, number one, the player power complexity that players were forced to engage with, and number two, the oversimplicity of professions, I remember thinking to myself, wouldn't it be nice if Blizzard took all that grindiness and all that complexity and just put that into professions instead of into player power? It would make professions interesting once again. It would probably bring back elemental reagents, and then people who don't want to engage with the complexity and the grindiness don't have to. And basically in Dragonflight, I've gotten exactly what I wished for. So now that I actually have it, the question opens up, am I actually enjoying it? And the short version is, it's a mixed bag. The good outweighs the bad, but there is room for improvement. And if Blizzard makes those improvements in the next expansion, professions are really going to be something. But obviously this video is longer than that, so let's get into the long version. I'll talk about the effects of complexity on professions, the effects of the grindiness on professions, and some of the problems the complexity and grindiness didn't solve, or I should say things that I thought the complexity and grindiness didn't solve. You'll understand that later in this video. I'm not proud of it, though. First of all, the complexity. Quite a few recipes were hidden behind engineering's profession talents, and some of those recipes are the recipes that stay orange right up until your maximum engineering skill. And if you've engaged with professions, you know exactly what I mean. For those of you who don't, a recipe in your profession window is orange if you're guaranteed to level up your profession skill from making it. It turns yellow if you're likely to level up your profession skill from making it. It turns green if you're unlikely to level up your profession skill from making it, and gray if you can no longer get any profession skill level ups from making it. And as you level up your profession skill, the recipes go from orange to yellow to green to gray, forcing you to find newer and higher skill recipes to keep leveling up your skill. And as you'd expect, leveling up your profession skill unlocks higher skill recipes. And there have been expansions where, for engineers at least, the difficult part was finding a recipe that both had reasonable reagents and that would remain orange, yellow, or at least green long enough for you to reach max level. I actually remember that back in Wrath of the Lich King, I kept making gnomish army knives long after they had turned green for me to get me up to Wrath of the Lich King's maximum engineering level. And I did that simply because gnomish army knives were easier to find reagents for than other high-end items that theoretically could have gotten me to maximum level if I had ground reagents for them. And Dragonflight turned out to be another one of these expansions. Getting to maximum engineering skill is not the same as maxing out your profession talents. Nothing like that. I'm talking about the profession skill itself here. And just like in Wrath of the Lich King, the tricky part in reaching maximum engineering skill was finding the right recipe that would stay orange and that had reasonable reagents. I did find it eventually. It was a box of bombs, but that recipe was locked behind the bomb branches of profession talents. And it is worth noting that I did not get the explosive talents right away, because with profession talents, you set your own goals about what kinds of things you want to craft or gather, for that matter. Those of you who've seen my videos already know I went for the elemental reagent talents in mining right away. And I veer for molten, hardened, and especially Titan-touched mining deposits while I'm flying around the Dragon Isles. And whenever I see the perception stat as a perk for reaching a talent milestone, I am quite motivated to get that milestone. In fact, perception is the only one of the profession stats that I even pay any attention to. Different strokes for different folks, I assume, but the point is, in this complex world of profession talents and profession stats, you set your goals. You have fun exploring the talent system as you go, and if I'm being honest, it wasn't until I reached a bunch of other goals like the weather controlling machine and some gearing goals that I actually began to consider maxing my engineering skill itself as a goal. Though I have to say, I was disappointed when I did reach that goal because when I maxed out my profession skill, I didn't get anything for doing so. Not unlocking cool recipes for cosmetics, no awesome death ray-like gun or tinker or trinket, just nothing. I think I'll revisit this in the things that didn't get solved section later. Let's talk about the grindiness before I get to that. Now, there are a bunch of plain old ceravite deposits here, there, and everywhere. And being the elemental reagent craving neckbeard that I am, I'm actually incentivized to get those non-elemental reagent bearing mining nodes. See, I've read that those plain mining nodes won't randomly respawn into element-bearing mining nodes unless someone goes and mines them. So, at least earlier on in my Dragonflight journey, I made it a point to mine those no-reagent, plain old vanilla mining nodes for ceravite. But here's something that Blizzard did right. They actually required a lot of handfuls of ceravite bolts to make engineering items, so all that ceravite that you're grinding actually has a real purpose. It's always good when things have a real purpose in a game. I mean, this is going to sound silly, but hear me out. I remember playing this Atari-esque My Little Pony G4 platformer. They threw it out there mostly just for a laugh. And while there were no enemies in the game other than the bosses, each pony character had an attack. And those attacks had a function in the ordinary maze-like levels. They broke down breakable barriers. And if the designers of that little game didn't add those breakable barriers, then those attacks would have been pointless. For that matter, it's the same thing for the health pools. With no enemies to actually hurt you in the ordinary levels, health would have meant nothing if not for the spikes that were in those mazes. And since I've been working on a made-from-scratch platformer fan game for the last 11 years, I have learned things in a game need to fit together like that. Everything in your game, from the health pool to the objects in the game to actions that the player can take, all of those things need to have an actual purpose or use, or else it's pointless. And Blizzard actually gave a use for grinding out ceravite. They don't always give items uses, mind you, or not always the proper uses. So this is definitely a good thing. And on the subject of just plain grinding a lot of ore, that's an activity that actually got my mining skill maxed out pretty fast. Again, there weren't really any rewards for having a maxed out mining skill, but since I wasn't putting any intentional effort into maxing it out, I didn't really notice one way or the other. But continuing to mine nodes is a great way to get ore chunks that give you a mining profession talent point. And there were some fun choices in the mining talent tree. Getting gems, more elemental reagents, staying mounted while mining, these were terrific rewards. Plus, the fact that there are actual surprises when mining was a great step in the right direction. There was a span of time, on and off from Mists of Pandaria to Battle for Azeroth, where you would never get anything except ore when you mined. Vanilla had stone, the Burning through Crusade through Cataclysm, those had elemental reagents, and all four of these parts of World of Warcraft's history had a small chance for gemstones to drop from mining nodes. But in Mists of Pandaria, nothing. Warlords of Draenor, stone, and primal spirits were things that we would get, but stone wasn't really good for much of anything. Remember how I said things need to fit together in games earlier? Yeah, they failed with the implementation of stone in Warlords of Draenor. It did not have a point. Anyhow, after that came Legion and Battle for Azeroth, and it was back to nothing but ore from these nodes. In Shadowlands, stone was back, but that didn't stick around in Dragonflight. But what we do get in Dragonflight are gems, if you talent for them, Khazgarite ore, the aforementioned talent-providing ore chunks, and if you find a primal, molten, hardened, or titan-touched mining node, elemental reagents! Yeehaw! Sure, elemental reagents don't drop from random, regular mining nodes like they used to in the Burning Crusade, Wrath, and Cataclysm, and, elemental reagents in Dragonflight are not the complex system based on Greek philosophy that I preached about in earlier videos. But hey, elemental reagents are back, and they actually provide flavor for recipes. Yes! And it was a delightful positive feedback loop with this system. As I keep mining, I keep getting profession talent point ore chunks. And as I keep getting profession talent points, I keep getting fun talents that make it more rewarding to mine. I love what they've done with mining in this expansion, though I can't help but wonder whether someone who isn't a casual OCD introvert like me, might not enjoy this grindy system of mining, or not enjoy world quests for that matter. On that subject, as you go out into the world and kill things and do world quests, sometimes enemies drop items that give you a profession talent point, like an infinitely combinable Paradox or a Titan Gizmo. And that also makes it rewarding to go out and do world quests and kill mobs, and it kind of reminds me of Motes of Harmony from Mists of Pandaria. Those were a flavorless elemental reagent that dropped from enemies randomly in Pandaria, and these talent point items kind of feel similar in a way. And they leave me wondering, if I were a hardcore raider who practically never logged in except to raid, would I find that this whole profession talent system was forcing me to do content I wasn't interested in? Though now that I think about this could be mitigated by a few things that Blizzard's already done in the game. For example, in 10.1, items will drop from raid bosses that you can turn into an NPC to get a profession talent point. And there are some weekly quests to get you profession talent points that don't take too long. So maybe this isn't as big a problem as I think. I don't know for sure, since I'm looking at it through the lens of casual play. But one last thing to talk about when it comes to grinding. The Zap Throttle Soul Extractor is clearly a shout out to the Zap Throttle Mode Extractor of the Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King fame. And the Mode Extractor practically gave engineers a completely separate and exclusive gathering system. And I loved it, especially in Wrath of the Lich King, because that Mode Extractor let me get fire elemental reagents that were difficult to get any other way, and thus were in pretty high demand on the auction house. But the Soul Extractor is a thing you cast on powerful elemental mobs in raids right before they die, instead of on elemental clouds that exist out in the world. The elemental soul reagents are pretty much just for you. That is to say, they can't be sold in the auction house or traded at all. And unlike primal or eternal elemental reagents from the Burning Crusade or Wrath, the elemental souls are used to create some cosmetic items instead of highly in-demand player power boosting items. Yeah, the Soul Extractor is not the Mode Extractor, and the Mode Extractor was more fun, more lucrative, and more useful. I'm hoping we get the Mode Extractor again in Ragnarok, or the Devouring Void, or the Dark Horizon, or whatever the next expansion is. And that is a good segue for talking about the problems that didn't get solved with a new profession revamp. Well, I'm going to find this part really embarrassing. Now, remember how I talked about professions being able to make weapons in the Battle for Azeroth expansion? I remember that jewelers could make staffs, which didn't make a lot of sense, but whatever. Leather workers could make bows, and of course, engineers like me could make one-handed maces. Plenty of weapons were still exclusive to blacksmiths, but I was excited about the prospect of being able to create my own heel mace. And then I was disappointed when I found out that those craftable maces very quickly get outclassed by gear that I could get from other sources like heroics or even quests. In fact, in Battle for Azeroth, the timing for some of those maces' item levels was so bad that they were never worth crafting for me. By the time I was able to craft them, my item level was already past the point where it would be helpful to do so. And as for transmogs, transmogging that? No thanks. The chainsaw sword from Wrath of the Lich King beats the grease out of that lemur wrench. That's right, it's not even a monkey wrench. It's a lemur wrench. Now, the problem of crafted gear getting outclassed is not that bad in Dragonflight. And actually, while I was still in the process of typing this script, here's the embarrassing part, I found out that Great Vault tokens could be used to purchase reagents that I'd have needed to upgrade my goggles and my bracers. That throws a lemur wrench into this whole section of my outline. There goes the script, ladies and gentlemen. Blizzard did solve this problem, and they did it right this time. It makes sense, and one of the complaints I was gonna file until I realized I'd made this mistake was that I was gonna complain you can't use tinkers except on crafted gear, And if you couldn't upgrade gear to keep up with gear that you got from other sources like raids, Mythic Plus, and PvP, then those tinkers are gone. But nope! You can upgrade crafted gear to keep up with gear that you get from other sources. Blizzard actually solved this one. That is 2 whole points from my outline of unsolved problems that Blizzard did in fact solve. You know, you could make the case that this was a good problem to have, but I digress. Let's move on. There wasn't a reward from maxing out my engineering profession. There could have been tons of stuff that they could have added. A shrink ray, mechanical mounts like those of Wrath or Mists, or even from the Mechanome Island in Battle for Azeroth. They could have added upgrades to cosmetic items, craftable transmog gear, access to elemental reagent convenience recipes, stat boosts, access to parts of the profession talents that I couldn't access before. But nope, none of that. There was no reward for maxing out my engineering profession's skill level. And, you know, I found the 2 recipes that could get me to the maximum engineering skill. Those are the bombs. I crafted them religiously every day, and then nothing. I set that goal, I achieved it, and then stopped visiting the Tinker Station in Valdrakken because there was nothing else that I felt was rewarding. And Blizzard could have done a lot of things to make it rewarding. And, you know, I know that eventually I would consume all the content that they've produced no matter what they did with professions, but if they do things right, then by the time I've consumed all the content they've produced, they'd have produced more content for me to consume. Heck, recolors or reskins of older weapons or gear, or even re-releases of the exact skins and models and colors of older weapons and equipment as cosmetic craftable transmogs would be quick and easy to release, and it would be rewarding for me as a player. Why don't they just do it? Still, it's comforting that Blizzard is in fact both able and willing to fix some of the worst of the problems. When I found out that I really could upgrade my gear using the Great Vault and that I'd frickin' missed something important, that threw this whole section of my outline into disarray. My next complaint from the outline was, it's not entirely true, but it's not entirely false either. Every expansion that comes out feels like Blizzard's attempting to completely reinvent the wheel when it comes to professions. They take what was done in the last expansion, throw it away, and then try to make something completely different. Mists of Pandaria, all of a sudden, elemental reagents are gone, replaced with Motes of Harmony. Motes of Harmony didn't work so well, so in Warlords of Draenor, elemental reagents are back, but now everything, including elemental reagents, is tied into your garrison and/or to daily cooldown items. But we also get item upgrade tokens in Warlords. Of course, daily cooldown items in Garrison sure didn't work, so in Legion, there were no elemental reagents at all, and upgrade tokens also disappeared. You get the idea. Instead of keeping the good and throwing out the bad, the Blizzard developers tend to throw out everything and start over. Though even that isn't entirely true. Recipe levels, which were introduced in Legion, stuck around for a while, though I'm kind of glad they went away in Dragonflight. They felt like they were padding. And to be sure, sometimes things make a comeback, like stone, elemental reagents, and upgrade tokens, albeit in very different ways. But instead of a process of continuous improvement, keeping the parts of a profession system that worked and applying those parts to the next expansion to make the next expansion as awesome as possible and only discarding the bad stuff, it feels like Blizzard is in the nasty habit of starting from scratch each time. Of course, Blizzard did this whole start from scratch thing with player power systems as well, but now the talent system that we have in Dragonflight is clearly intended to be carried forward and iterated upon. I mean, it hasn't gotten me Holy Radiance or Especially Denounce back. I really can't do a video without mentioning that. But the good in the Dragonflight talent system definitely outweighs the bad, and now that I've found out I can upgrade my crafted gear, I'd say the good definitely outweighs the bad for Dragonflight's professions as well. And I'm hoping that Blizzard's current philosophy about carrying forward the existing system and iterating on it also gets applied to professions. There is room for improvement, but the worst of the pain points are gone. And whichever veteran developer who shouldn't get fired, who has a hard-on for complexity and grindy systems, can still put their complexity and grindy systems in a place where they'll do no harm and indeed can do some good. And overall, I've had fun with Professions, and I have to say, Dragonflight was a big step in the right direction.